you're in that space of pure awareness, you see the mind. You're seeing the mind instead of being the mind. And so when you see the mind go, jump into a fear train, maybe pick up on somebody else's fear thoughts and join that train, right away you see it. You could switch tracks. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in this return of the Christ. A lot more people transforming within themselves the way that they are perceiving others, the way they perceive themselves. A huge shift, I think, is coming that we're just at the beginning of right now in just living more and more from this place of love and fear having less and less of a grip on us. We came to be here during this time, whether we're conscious of that or not, and many of you are, to help initiate this time, but to both receive the gift of this immense time on the planet, which is the gift of awakening and returning to that Christ energy, as well as to support that in others, right? Hello and welcome to the Higher Vibe. I'm your host, Jean Roorda. As you've probably noticed, if you've been following this channel, I've been offering a lot of conversations with psychic friends and an occasional offering just with myself. And today we have one more of those. This time I would love to share with you about some perspectives on the return of the Christ. So this is something that we've probably heard a lot about, whether it's from religious circles or sometimes in esoteric circles, there's a lot of talk about the return of the Christ as well. Certainly the religious perspective on this has a lot to do with, imagining we're being rescued by Jesus, who's returning, coming back to rescue us all. And that is all well and good. And I'm not here to speak against any of those perspectives, but to just offer another perspective as well that may resonate with many of you. And it may be considered more of an esoteric perspective, but also if you just listen beyond the words to really the frequency, right? The Higher Vibe is the name of this channel. The vibration, the energy that's being offered as I'm communicating about this topic of the return of the Christ. And you may notice some of that energy moving through you and just awakening you to this return of an energy that's always been in and with you, but maybe not fully embodied, certainly, as Jesus did. Fully embodied that Christ energy. So let's start there. What is Christ energy? What is the Christ? What does that mean, right? In Christianity, that's specifically just referring to the person we know as Jesus, the historical person known as Jesus. But why was Jesus called the Christ? Christ wasn't his last name, right? We say Jesus Christ all the time. I probably say it a little bit too much. But that wasn't his last name, right? That wasn't his surname. It was really Jesus the Christ. So there was an energy there that people recognized and that they saw in Jesus and therefore referred to him as Jesus the Christ or Jesus Christ. And what is that Christ energy? So that's what I'd love to say hello to. Not only because we're in the season of Christmas, if you're listening to this in present time, we're in that season of the holy days where we have solstice and Hanukkah and Christmas and Kwanzaa and many other traditions around the world celebrate this time where, in that winter solstice window, we have in the Northern Hemisphere that darkening, the darkest days, right? We have that time of outer darkness, which really calls forth the remembrance of that inner light. And so that's really what the Christ is. It's that inner light of the oneness of our beingness. And the reason why Jesus was called the Christ was because he really embodied that. He really demonstrated and lived that Christ energy fully, right? And he did teach, though, that we can all do that, right? He said, "This too and more you shall do." So he didn't really teach that he was the only Christ. He really just demonstrated that Christ energy. that energy of, or that awareness of the oneness of inner beingness. And well, what is that? There's more to it than just those words, but it's certainly a vibration of unity, of wholeness, of pure awareness, of beingness. I would say it's also an energy of lovingness, right? An energy of kindness, sharing, like what does that Christ energy inspire? And that's seen in how Jesus lived his life and how other Christed beings, so to speak, that we do know others historically who are no longer maybe with us in physical, but there are others who walk the earth now that we could say embody that Christed energy. And you may know of some, or you may have heard about them, but they really demonstrate and live that kindness, that lovingness, peace. Certainly there is a depth of unefforted peace that they live in and demonstrate. Givingness, sharing. I think the Christed energy really inspires one to live from a place of sharing and giving, because when you're recognizing the oneness of beingness, you recognize that that's in everyone, right? Not just you. It really eliminates that sense of specialness. And you see it in everyone, and therefore want to give and share with everyone, because they're all part of that oneness of beingness, whether they recognize it or not, right? And so it inspires that kindness, that givingness, that sharing energy. And that's one of the things I wanted to say hello to with this concept of the return of the Christ, in that I see it as not just, not a person returning, but really all of us having this heightened opportunity, this expanded energy that's more palpable on the earth right now of this Christ energy. And it's really shifting the vibration. It's really shifting how we live together. And it won't be overnight, but I think a lot of us are very aware that the energy's moving away from these old models of scarcity and competition and effort, right? Working so hard and getting nowhere. These older models are dying away now and falling apart, and it's time for something new. And that new energy that's coming in, part of that is the return of this Christ energy of sharing and kindness and giving. And this, you might not see this in every person you meet, but the general trend, right? You see society moving more towards creating systems of caring for one another, of sharing. The impetus to live in community is growing exponentially. I would say more and more people that I encounter, that I see online, that I tune into in the world are just interested in and recognizing, like, the way we're living is dysfunctional. Right? And living in community is how we care for one another and provide and have abundance, right? That community is abundance. And that, I think, is one of the ways that this return of the Christ will be seen and demonstrated, because not only does community support and allow for this way of living that's all about kindness and sharing and givingness and reciprocity and deep listening and self-knowing, it requires those things, right? You can't live in community harmoniously. And this is why I think a lot of communities in the past have failed or hit roadblocks, because you can't function in community harmoniously until you embody more of this self-awareness and this Christ consciousness that really inspires putting others before yourself often, but then including yourself, right? It's not about giving to the point of negating your own needs, but really including everyone. So it's not selfish, but it's not selfless in the sense of eliminating your own needs, but really giving from that selfless place in terms of seeing everyone as just as important, and having your actions and inspiration be all about how can we I live in a place that's supporting the whole and the wholeness of life and the wholeness of my community and the wholeness of earth. So that's one of the directions we're moving in, thank goodness, right? With this return of the Christ energy. But what else does that mean? It's also something, again, I'm going to bring up Jesus. Again, in religious circles, we might say that the return of the Christ is perceived as the being of Jesus returning to save us all. And while I don't see it that way, again, I don't want to negate that. I think that is one way that this can be perceived. But the way that I see this is the return of the energy that Jesus was embodying and demonstrating and living in. Again, kindness, lovingness, and awareness of the oneness of beingness, but also miracle energy. I want to say hello to miracle energy. And obviously in the Bible, there's a lot of stories of the miracles that Jesus, quote, performed that were demonstrated by him and that others witnessed in his presence. And I'm not saying that all of a sudden everyone's going to be performing miracles, but just what does miracle energy really mean? And how is that related to this return of the Christ? And I think what it's really about is that miracles are that natural extension or demonstration of really living from that place of the awareness of the oneness of beingness, the awareness of your inner self that is whole and one, and that is within each perceived separate body out there. And when you're living from that place, miracles are just a natural expression of that. Now, I'm not saying that you'll walk around turning water into wine. You could. But more so living from a place of recognizing the love that's always present rather than focusing on the fear or being caught up in the fear mindset. So one of the things I really want to say hello to about miracle energy is that it's really just, mindset is a really big word right now that's used a lot, so I'll use that. It's a mindset of living from that place of lovingness and really having love be the space that you're living in and from rather than fear, right? And so when you're living in that place of love, miracles are a natural extension of that. And I think we've in the past defined miracles as maybe those things like turning water into wine, like alchemical things, or these just really out of the ordinary, shocking things that some people would say, well, that's impossible, so that must be a miracle. But a miracle can be as simple as waking up in joy every day after maybe having lived a life that was full of depression. A miracle could be as simple as being able to smile at and love someone who previously you just always felt frustration or anger or hatred towards. So a miracle is anything that just transforms your inner perspective and therefore the outer way in which you live and demonstrate that perspective. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that in this return of the Christ, a lot more people transforming within themselves the way that they are perceiving others, the way they perceive themselves. A huge shift, I think, is coming that we're just at the beginning of right now in just living more and more from this place of love, and fear having less and less of a grip on us, especially some of the more subconscious or unconscious fears that run a lot of our lives without us realizing it because it's subconscious. And those fears right now, especially those subconscious ones, are what's been coming to the surface more and more. Right? And so we might be seeing these times as very chaotic and all these scary things happening, but really those are the reflection of these deeper subconscious fears coming to the surface and releasing to make more space for this lovingness that we're all stepping into more and more, or we have the opportunity to, right? We still live in a free will planet, and it's still our decision whether or not we're going to have that, receive that, allow that. But that is part of what this return of the Christ is all about. Rather than an individual, it's this opportunity that each individual has to receive and allow and expand into that awareness of the oneness of beingness. Words are funny. The awareness of this Christ energy, this lovingness, and all of the ways that that lovingness is demonstrated. Again, with kindness, with givingness, with compassion, with sharing, with caring for one another, caring for the earth. It's going to bring about, I see, a renaissance in caring for the earth. And not in some of the kind of corporatized ways that we're seeing right now with like the green energy movement and things, but with, not that those are bad, but with really a deeper sense of like, oh, we are the earth, like our bodies are part of the earth. We can't mistreat her because we want to treat her well so that we can be treating ourselves well. I think it's this shift in how we treat the earth will be a reflection of a shift in how we treat ourselves, and really just recognizing that our abuse of the earth over the past many millennia has been a reflection of the collective abuse of self as well, the collective denial of self, the denial of our oneness of beingness, and therefore our connection and really inherently part of the earth. That's who and how we are living here in earthly bodies. So I think that's going to be part of the changes we're seeing. And so to really say hello to this return of the Christ, especially at Christmas time, I want to say how important it is to recognize that, yeah, we celebrate the Christ energy, whether we're Christian or not. We celebrate the Christ energy during the darkest time of the year, right? And we can also be celebrating and saying hello to and inviting in that Christ energy during this seemingly darkest part of, humanity's timeline right now, where it might seem like things are really dark. And I know a lot of people are super tuned into this loving energy, this light. But I just want to say, if ever it seems like this is the dark night of the collective soul, yes, it is. It may seem that way. And this is just like the darkest night of the year, this winter solstice time, we can tune into that inner light. And that is really what's guiding our way through this darkness. That inner light is our GPS, really our inner GPS, that inner light and inner lovingness guiding us on our next steps through this dark night of the collective soul, or this this time of deep, like so much is getting undone and falling apart to make space for the new. And so as we look at the world around us, especially at the kind of turbulence that the earth is going through in terms of floods and volcanoes and hurricanes and in previous seasons, earthquakes, all of the movement that's happening is reflected in each of us as well, as we're having these deep inner movements, these deep inner growth periods, these deep inner transformations. And so again, we're not separate from the earth. We're all going through this huge growth period together. And it's really exciting, especially when you just recognize, oh yeah, this all has to do with the return of the Christ. This was prophesied by many, many different cultures and traditions, and some having different names for it. I'm using the return of the Christ as one way of just referencing some of the different prophecies that have been made in the past about this time period. But certainly there are others, so many, especially indigenous prophecies about this time period that of course use different words for it, but they're all linked. They're all of those prophecies are saying hello to this same major transformation that we're all in. And I just want to remind us all that it doesn't have to be doom and gloom at all, and it's not. It can be that if you choose it, and then that's, the reality you'll be creating. But it's really an opportunity to create in and from that miracle energy, and that space of love just creates so many miracles and so much beauty, and really a sense of limitless possibilities, right? That anything is possible, and no matter how dire or awful or tragic or doom and gloom it may seem outwardly when you look at the destruction that's still happening, the violence that's still happening, the disparity, that's still happening, and just the suffering that's still happening. We can still, within each of us, create a new reality and new systems and new ways of being on the earth with ourselves and with each other that are based on lovingness and sharing and givingness and a nurturing of self and others in community. We can create that, and that happens when we restore within each of us, restore that space of love within us, and really operate from that space and really recognize, really get to know ourselves and get to know our mind and recognize when we're switching to that old fear track, right? And creating from fear and kind of in those loops of, oh no, but what about this? Oh no, but what about this? To be able to consciously recognize that and switch over to the love track, that is the return of the Christ. I want to say it's so much about just pure awareness, just total awareness. And when you're in that space of pure awareness, you see the mind. You're seeing the mind instead of being the mind. And so when you see the mind go, jump into a fear train, maybe pick up on somebody else's fear thoughts and join that train, right away you see it, you're like, oh, look at that. And you could switch tracks. With pure awareness, you have that power of decision because you're not being the mind. When you're being the mind and it jumps on that fear track, it takes you, that train just goes running and you're gone. And all kinds of scary things get created in the mind. But when you're seeing the mind rather than being it, you see it right away. Oh, look at all that fear. And you can make a new decision and you can let that go and bring in whatever you choose. Bring in some lovingness, bring in some amusement, bring in just what is it that you'd like to create instead of that, right? And it's not about denying reality. It's about seeing where that reality is coming from, where that perception of reality, where that experience that you're having out in the world and in your body, where that's coming from. The return of the Christ brings in this havingness for pure awareness so that in awareness you can recognize and take ownership of the creative power of your mind and see, oh, this experience, oh, this is being created by these thoughts, by these perceptions, by these pastime decisions, right? And by this stuck energy. And with self-honesty, you can choose to let that go. First, you have to recognize it, right? That's where the self-honesty comes in. Oh, but I also want to say, just again, in the context of the religious perspective and the Christian perspective around this time of Christmas, whether you follow this holy season from the Christian perspective, or you have the beautiful Jewish tradition of Hanukkah, or you're just more of an earthy person and you celebrate solstice, whatever the season of celebration that you have for this deep winter time, you can allow for this inner light to be what you're celebrating. If you're celebrating Christmas and you're celebrating Jesus' birth, that is the birth of a being of light onto the planet, right? And just like this expansion of light that he brought onto the planet at that time, that was seeded, that was initiated, and that continued to grow, right? In many, many future generations, all the way up till now, you can celebrate that. If you're celebrating the winter solstice, you can celebrate that inner light within you is what guides you through this dark time, right? That we see that no matter how dark it is out there, the light returns, right? We can celebrate that in the darkness, there is still the light. And if you celebrate the Jewish traditions of Hanukkah, there's so much of a hello to light, right? There's each of the nights, a new candle is lit, a new fire is lit, a candle of remembrance and honoring that light returning. So I love that no matter what the tradition is during this time, and I know I'm leaving many out, but those are the main ones, in this culture. No matter what tradition you celebrate, any and all of them, it all comes back to that return of the light and the remembrance of the light, even in the darkest times. And so that is what this time is about for me and for many people, both on that micro level of this yearly cycle, but also now, and this is a very exciting cycle indeed, now it's also a celebration of the larger cycle, that we are completing this large cycle of humanity and initiating a completely new cycle. Astrologers and even people who aren't tuned into astrology but just really tuned in energetically are recognizing, but especially if you follow the astrological forecast, you're aware of the fact that we are completing huge cycles, right? Huge 12,000 years. Sometimes many of the cycles that we're completing are even larger than that, but certainly several 12,000 year cycles. And so that's a big deal, right? that's many hundreds of lifetimes. And so to be at this ending of so many cycles and beginning of a new cycle phase, that is similar to being in the dark night of the soul that's then birthing, the new light is returning, we're opening up and birthing something new. So this is a very exciting time. I know a lot of souls are here just for this, we're like, yes, we came to be here during this time, whether we're conscious of that or not, and many of you are, to help initiate this time, but to both receive the gift of this immense time on the planet, which is the gift of awakening and returning to that Christ energy, as well as to support that in others, right? So we're giving that to others, we're receiving that for ourselves, and we're here to really ground in that energy. This return of the Christ, again, if it's not just about one being returning to save us all, it's really about that Christ energy returning and being embodied in the collective more and more. Maybe not every single person, and that's okay, but a larger amount of humans on the planet than ever before really are going to be embodying more and more of this Christ energy. And so notice I use the word embody, because this is the tricky part. So many of us may recognize that energy, when we say hello to it and we're aware of it on some spiritual level, like, oh yeah, there's the oneness of beingness, and that might sound like this vague concept sort of out there somewhere. And there may be a sense of it, but it's a little disembodied. Are we living it in our daily life? And we may be humbled daily by how much we're not living it yet, right? But just to continue to say hello to that and to recognize one of the most important aspects of this return of the Christ is the awareness of forgiveness, and that no matter what's coming up for us on the daily or how many times we feel like we're not embodying that, that it's okay. It doesn't have to be some goal we're racing towards, or, it's not about trying to be perfect. It's about bringing that awareness right here into our daily lives, in the moment to moment, and recognizing that if and when we don't appear to be embodying that, we can bring some of that Christed energy into our awareness. We can bring some amusement in. We can laugh at ourselves. We can forgive. We can return to kindness to ourselves, to our family members, to our loved ones. And we can invite that lovingness back in to all of our relationships, that lovingness to our own heart, and we can invite that lovingness to really come in and transform our lives from the inside out, and invite those miracles, invite that miracle energy in, and just from a place of curiosity and wonder and some enthusiasm, just see where that takes us, see what we can create, and see what transforms in our lives when we invite that in. So that is what this return of the Christ from my perspective, is all about. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to that. Thank you if you're here. Thank you for being here. I'm planting a few seeds out there of this return of the Christ. I would love to hear from you if you feel like this resonates with you, if this is something that you've thought about as well or are aware of as well, and maybe have different words for it. You know, it's not always about exactly how it's interpreted through the words, but really this energy. If you're also aware of this energy, this return, this immense new wave of light and lovingness coming onto the planet that's coming forth within each of us. If you're aware of that as well, I'd love to hear from you, because I'd love to know where you are in the world. Like, I know that there is this web of grounded presence of the Christ throughout the planet, you know, and I know that people are scattered in all parts of the earth. Some of them in places of a lot of turbulence, and some of you in places where there might be a lot more peace and you're able to live peaceful lives. But wherever you are, if you're embodying that Christ energy more and more, even just with a little bit of willingness towards that, with that intention, you're grounding that light into the area, the space, the community, and the place on the earth where you live. So I'd love to know where on the earth you are if you're hearing this. And I know that because of the language might be limited in my reach, but I'm delighted to know that others are out there living in that place of that lovingness. And again, not needing to be perfect about it, but we're just saying hello to that Christ within us and saying hello to that Christ within each person that we encounter, and celebrating that and allowing the healing of that and the transformation that that offers for ourselves and others, allowing that to be, so that this huge time of growth and change and intense movement of energy can really be a time of experiencing that growth with grace. That's another aspect of the return of the Christ that I'm aware of, is this energy that we call grace. And when we invite grace into our lives, instead of everything being like a struggle or bumpy or it's so difficult, like as soon as we say hello to grace, it's like parting of the waters, right? It smooths the energy out. It opens the space to allow for ease and for, rather than transformation having to be this thing that is a struggle or that's difficult or that's like painful and gnarly, it's like, oh, it can actually be like a surrender into grace, like this beautiful sigh of release. And it doesn't mean that, again, that there's nothing difficult, but it lightens the load. It lightens the load tremendously. And that's another aspect of the return of the Christ that I'd love to say hello to out there, is all of you just living in grace. Again, not being perfect, but like, hey, there's a lot more grace in your life, right? You're easily led to your next step. There's a lot of intuitive knowing. There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of deep inner peace, or you can access that when you need to, no matter what kinds of things are going on in life that might seem turbulent or crazy. I'd love to know if you're hearing this out there. I'd love to hear from you. So thank you for your presence today, and I hope that you enjoy this beautiful season of the return of the Christ. Not only just this winter solstice season, I'm recording this right before the winter solstice, but also during this larger season of transformation and completing cycles and beginning huge new cycles on the planet. I wish you well during this powerful time of transformation, and I think that one of the main tools that we can use, if you want to call it a tool, the main things that we can remember during this time of the return of the Christ is to let go of judgment and to return to that lovingness. I think judgment is what often separates us or divides us or has us kind of blinded to that Christ energy. And when we see that and recognize that judgment energy, we can be much more present with the Christ energy, that lovingness and that sharing and that givingness. That's been my practice recently, is just recognizing more and more when that judgment comes up. And it comes up a lot. And I'm not just talking about like the world out there, just especially noticing it in personal relationships, in inner circle, like, and also just out in the world, but just noticing when that judgment energy comes up. And just like fear, which is what judgment comes from, to notice, oh, I'm in it, right? To be that witness to the mind, to see the mind rather than be the mind. And the less we hold on to those judgments, the more we can return to that lovingness and then create from that place, which is going to be a lot more community connection and creating sustainable ways of living on the planet. Because when we can come together, when we aren't divided by judgment and by fear, we can come together and create anything. We're powerful creators. I know that that's possible, and I know that that's the direction we're moving in. And I'm really excited when I see it out there happening. I see so many people just dropping their old way of living and moving towards more connection and more community and more creativity and more beauty and more caring for the earth and for each other. So I'm celebrating that. I'm seeing that return of the Christ in those ways. And I'm also recognizing, especially during this time, that one of the ways that we can tune into that within ourselves and create more space within ourselves for this Christ energy, especially if you're not seeing that or feeling that. If you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I'm not experiencing that at all, or even just a little bit, to really give yourself time and space for stillness. For whether that's a practice of meditation or simply just being still and breathing, focusing on your breath, or listening to some super quiet, still, nervous system relaxing kind of music or tones or anything like that, to return to a space of stillness. If you can create that space within your day, on a daily basis, that will support you in accessing this energy, because it is within you. And so it's within each of us. And the Christ in you is very still. It's very quiet. It's not a loud voice. And when we tune into and really match and become and give space for that stillness, we allow more of that Christ energy to awaken within us. It's a space of deep stillness and peace and presence. And then we can bring more of that presence into our daily lives. So I invite you to create that space for yourself. And I'm celebrating that each of us can create space for that stillness in our lives and that spaciousness for the Christ to return within each of us. And which is, again, just that awareness of the oneness of beingness. And from that space, we can live as these humans that we're embodying right now, from a place of deep care and connection and kindness and lovingness for all. Thank you for being. Thank you for hearing my talk on the return of the Christ today. I have one more coming up next week, and I look forward to seeing you again on the Higher Vibe. Goodbye for now. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. If you did, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. Share this with friends. Really helps us out, and we really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you next time.